Ntate Motsumi, let me take this opportunity and hand over the platform to you to share with us what you have prepared. Let me just load this presentation that you've prepared for us. I hope everything goes well with it. Let's see if it's there.
No, Kiona.
Okay, let's try and make it onto full
It has been
screen.
reformatted, but Kiona.
Okay, hopefully the content has not been bastardized, you know.
No, not at all.
It's all that you have given me.
Yeah.
Can you see it there? My
Well, don't
screen,
worry if
my screen has just gone a little bit blank this side, but can you see it on your side?
I don't. I can't see it.
Okay, something is not right. Let me just check your screen sharing. That's what it tells me, that I'm screen sharing. Let me just try and fix the technical issues here. Okay, let me stop sharing and start again. We can start sharing when someone is sharing only host. All right, let me try again. Trying to just stay here close to me.
Hi,
This is
let me just suggest we should move on from the technical hitch.
okay. If you've got the, yes, no, that's fine. No, I think we figured out what the problem is. If you've got the hard copy with you, please feel free to go ahead. But it looks like we have figured it out. All right, now it's there. You can see it now, no?
Yes, I can.
Okay, let me just do
and
this.
I see you pointing to broadening it.
Yes, but I don't know why it's not going there. Let's see if it will work now. Okay, perhaps you should start in the Makhene, and now we'll try and sort out the technicalities this side. Yeah.
I think that's a good suggestion.
Yes.
Given the time, and I want to start by saying thank you very much for the opportunity to participate in this very important global event, which is Black History Month. And we're looking at the perspective of the role of the arts in that history. Mainly, I'm going to focus, my direction is to look at the North-South cultural theories that are competing.
Okay, there we go.
And as they compete, I'm focusing on why, after so many, basically a century, why we still have a problem of racism in the arts. And I won't give much detail really looking at the individuals and the works of art, but the general presentation will be about oral performance, which historically has been a place of play for Black artists, and also literary performance, which includes your theater and audiovisual performance. Just to foreground the conversation, I thought I should firstly make a point that we are at the crossroads as we speak. After 40 years or so since 1976, which was the height, in my view, of the colonial urbanization project. And the second crossroads is now with the height of what I call the global urbanization project of smart cities. Because the idea of smart cities and metropolitan life in general has serious implications for the arts. When you look at retrospectively, from 1976 to now, we've had quite a flourishing era of the arts, Black arts in particular. And just to give a sense of the contribution of the arts to the struggle of South Africa, there's an academic at the Cambridge University Marcus Morgan, who also published with Patrick Bayet, basically saying that the Black consciousness movement transformed a collection of relatively abstract philosophies into a concrete political practice. It challenged the psychological internalization of white supremacy and asserted citizenship claims through a variety of performative techniques within a remarkably restrictive context of apartheid. Now, in this context, the Black arts have played a very important role, and I see you have Ingwapele Madingwane, who was one of the foremost players, particularly in the 70s and in the 80s. The other perspective that I want to look at as we go towards the end of the presentation is that of the projective challenge of 2028.
Ntate Mokhene, we are also trying to go live on Facebook here as well.
Okay.
Thank you. Maybe just get closer.
I'm not sure. Could you just check whether it's better?
It's much better now. It's much better now.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. I was saying that towards the end of the presentation, I want to look at the question of the fourth industrial revolution, as they call it. Here we have a challenge of the globe being turned into a single village, and in a history where, when you look at from the 60s to now, Black arts, particularly in film and television, are not growing strongly as Black arts, but participants in European and American forms of expression and representation. So I want to touch on that, because if we are to find a way forward as South Africans and as Black people and as a black world, we have to deal with the reality of cyberspace, of the virtual world. So that I'm just foregrounding the fact that we had two challenges. The first crossroads was in 76, but I think the next crossroads, futurists say, will be 2028. If you go to the following slide, it speaks about colonialism and the paradox of Africa's cultural wealth.
Okay.
In this slide, okay, people don't see it.
Okay, I'm gonna get to it now. Just go
okay.
on. There's something I'm trying to do here. Yeah.
Okay. The development of the arts in South Africa, as we celebrate them through Black history, really have been a response to a 1835 presentation to the British Parliament that explains why we are where we are at the moment as a people. Basically, a declaration by Lord Macaulay, who said that he's been throughout Africa, and some people may be familiar with this expression. He says that he hasn't seen one beggar who is a thief. Such wealth I have seen in the country or in the continent, such high values, people of such caliber, that I do not think we would ever conquer Africa unless we break the very backbone of Africa. So I'm trying to suggest that the trajectory or the path the arts and culture, Black arts and culture follow, is actually based on a response to colonial influences, which gave rise to heritage genocide, systematically identifying or creating an identity crisis, which the Black consciousness movement dealt with in the 70s, and also the Bantu education system, that is a system of mental slavery. So basically, when you read that article that he was presenting as a report to their parliament, he was focusing on education as an important weapon of modernity to make sure that there is cultural impoverishment.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the first stage of of um, of this era of response to the British saw a lot of development of jazz right from the 40s into the 50s into the 60s, and a lot of theater
Right, Lord.
and a lot of writings. And with regards to writings, that stems back from as far back as 1880 with writers and artists responding to a global pressure of colonialism.
Mm.
In the 1950s, as we know, we then see the introduction of Bantu education. And in this Bantu education, it is important to note that Verwoerd says that it must be able to give itself complete expression and must be guided to serve uh, the community in all ways. And it's very interesting that when it is presented as a positive thing, and yet it actually is an instrument of production of slavery.
Mm.
And the African community was also expected to fund it. And by funding it, the government created all sorts of entertainment venues, including taking over the production of Mkomboti
Mm.
as a state enterprise that would then support the growth and emergence of new theater, new dances, new music from Marabi to Guma to Kwela, Mbakanga.
Mm.
That is the environment of response, which was not seen necessarily as a positive response. But when you look at it from the black side, it was positive in the sense that it became the custodian of the ancient, the custodian of black pride.
Mm.
As a result, when you then see some of the products of this environment, such as Bra Hugh or Bra Abdullah Ibrahim, they actually reflected very deeply on the whole wave of black arts and black thought that emerged, that influenced them. And we all know that Bra Hugh and Bra Jonas Gwangwa and many others were supported when they were at St. Peter's as young people through education, the education system,
Mm.
to be introduced to the arts. And today, when you look at the education environment, the arts don't feature anymore. And when you look at how our government supports or does not support the arts, there's a whole movement, for instance, at the moment, which is a protest movement against government for the poor showing in terms of the arts. And I think somewhat this is informed by the history that came before 1994. For instance, Abdullah Ibrahim says that when he talks about what he does, which is jazz, he says jazz is not music.
Mm.
It is a social expression as it tells as it tells a story of how improvisation saved his life in the unpredictable urban life of racial segregation, black township removals from white designated areas, police arrests, and broken families of apartheid. So when we talk about the history of the black arts and culture, it is not separate from the social realities that everyone experiences, and everybody knows about the metaphor that Brahu developed out of the migration system. He
Mm.
himself was a migrant, and he recalls in the song Stimela the whole Southern African forced labor system
Yeah.
through Stimela. And his family, for instance, I didn't know that Hugh's father was a sculptor.
Oh, okay. That's interesting.
when I went to visit him some time long ago, he then showed me the work that he kept very, very dearly as a product of his father's work, which is a sculpture.
mm,
So basically, he shows how migration from Malawi, from Tanzania, Mozambique, from Lesotho, and all these other areas, how migration became a vehicle for the convergence of various Black arts, from dance through to music. But he puts it in this painful journey of the coal train.
mm,
And it's as if there's a contradiction of the train should not leave you behind, otherwise you will not experience the adventure of the mining world. At the same time, they remember home, all of them that come to the mines, and they are faced with the horror of the mining system.
mm,
So when we celebrate the History Month, Black History Month, and look at the arts, we then look at how the arts have been a source of hope and a source of growth for Black people who were in the hostels, but subsequently in the townships. And there continues to be a gap between our understanding of the value of the arts and culture in South
mm-hmm,
Africa and the European understanding of the arts. Because for Europeans, uh, when they see the arts, it's almost like a new intangible mine, which must be sourced, extracted, and used for material gain and benefit. So our approach to historically of relating to the arts is a spiritual approach, and yet for Europeans, the arts are an industrial opportunity.
mm,
And so the next discussion really is about the contending cultural ecosystems and theories. Skiam Patlele in 1991, in an exhibition that was made possible by Anglo-American. The exhibition is owned by Brandhurst Collection of
mm-hmm,
Southern African Arts from 1850 to 1950. This was at the Johannesburg Gallery somewhere in 1991.
wow,
And so being aware of the contradictions between our understanding and the understanding of Europeans of African art, he then he's asked to contribute to a book called Art and Ambiguity. And it's interesting and he challenges the establishment by making a number of observations. Firstly, he says that it should not be with a sense of innocence or paradise that we view Southern African art that is at the Johannesburg Art Gallery then.
mm,
He also says that the makers of this art, which is artists, and in this collection you find sculptures, you find craft, you find what people wear and what people use, really utility art. And he says these artists did not stand outside their creators and think or talk about them as objects of intellectual discourse
mm,
or a bountiful harvest in the orchard of
mm,
the imagination that they represent. Now, he's challenging notions of art being something that you collect, art that is something that you intellectualize about. He's saying that these artists actually live art. He
mm,
then says, no, would they, meaning the artists, have thought of themselves and their generation as the epitome of their innocence, in the sense of being unschooled practitioners. The antithesis of the self-conscious artists of today, who begin to experiment with forms and formulas, is basically a delusion. So he's looking at how Europeans would look at Black art and represents at the same time the value of black art from the holistic social experience, not from a commercial commodity perspective. So when you then look at what is happening in terms of waves and forces within the arts, we need to understand that when we celebrate the arts, we are doing it from our own perspective. It is not celebrated the same way, for instance, by Europeans, in the sense that there's a theory that I bumped into by an organization called the New Atlantis.
The New Atlantis. Okay. South
The
African?
The New Atlantis is a movement of academics and intellectuals who look at Europe and European history of art and science and philosophy. And in this, they actually explain the problem or the troubles we are in as Black people, but also as artists. For instance, firstly, that for the ancients, which means the Greeks, man was bound by not wholly defined as part of nature, which will be a strange notion when you look at how we understand man or human beings. Okay. The study, they claim that the study of natural phenomenon and human affairs had to be a distinct discipline from the other. Nature and man are distinct in kind. Therefore, there is a science that exclusively should focus on the distinct nature of man, which is political science. They say political science was a distinct form of study from that of natural phenomenon. And when they conclude, they say that political science is meant to develop ideals of predictability and even control and manipulation of human beings, which would be greatly desirable ultimately. Okay. So as we create art and we exhibit it, we put it into the national broadcast systems, we put it into theaters. There's one understanding which says that we're doing it as part of an American and European industrial environment that loves our art, that will collect our art, that loves our music, but only for industrial purposes. So okay. There are two theories of persuasion. One is European, and the other is African. Okay. The African perspective, which puts art into history, looks beyond the present and the future. It goes right into the ancient thought of African humanism.
All right, that's interesting.
Again, I want to go back to Eskiam Patlele, who suggested in a book called Poetry and Humanism, Oral Beginnings. This is in 1986, when he was chairperson of the Funda Community College there.
All right. Yes.
He says that he proposes that what we see in Black art and Black expression and representation is the play out of what he calls the African's traditional habit of mind. Remember the other habit of mind, the European traditional habit of mind says, you study nature separate from the human being. So Mphahlele comes and says, the traditional habit of mind of an African gathers together man, nature, and ancestry within a broader environment of the vital force that exhibits and gives meaning to relationships. Now, these relationships are, you will see in my screen, I deliberately show the rural life. Because in rural life, that's where the four forces or four elements interplay.
Very lovely picture, by the
way. Because in all of us, there is a rural person.
Yes.
And up to now, in our history of expression, and we have experienced this at the Funda Community College, that the curriculum has been shaped or was shaped by rural experiences in urban areas. And the evolution of jazz in South Africa, the evolution of theater in South Africa, the evolution of religious expression that includes hymns and other musics, stems from the rural worldview of what art is and how art plays a role in society. For instance, if you look at one of the institutions that we need to pay attention to, that are custodians of rural expression and heritage, would be the churches themselves, not the conventional churches, but those African traditional churches. Like the Shembe Church.
Very true, yeah.
Like the Lekhanyani Church. And unfortunately, there was the church of Gijima in the Eastern Cape that was massacred by the British. Today, when you look at the position of royal houses in terms of being custodians of African arts, it's still there, but there's a problem of the strength of the royal houses of various national groups in South Africa, because apartheid has not come to an end. Traditionally, these are the custodians of the dance, of the music through rainmaking, of the music of war. When men come from war, they sing those melancholic songs. So we are now at the second crossroads where these institutions are being dismantled, particularly post 1994, because pre-1994, these were basically the cider tales of national identity.
Okay.
I don't know how much time I have. I just want to
okay, try and wrap it up in the next 2 to 3 minutes.
Yes.
We will come back to it if we have more time. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's why.
I must apologize to you because it looks like the screen is frozen here, but I keep battling to try and get it moving.
Frozen. That's fine. That's
okay.
Fine. The last one is actually about the last crossroads, which is Quo Vadis. Where are we going as Black arts? I mean, in the environment of the Black Panther, which was one of the biggest blockbusters in the cinema world, where if you look at representation and even the costume itself, which gives a sense of Black pride, some of the sets that create focus in the film part of the Black Panther movement in terms of symbolism, of power, of identity, of pride. And I don't know how many people know that the costumes of the Black Panther were actually designed by a white woman.
Okay.
There's been for instance, a remark that the Black Panther chair, you know, where the king T'Challa sits surrounded by this sun, which was a symbol which you'd find in the Black Panther imagery. So this is an example of, yes, you can think that now black theater or black filmmaking and black music is actually being now co-opted into the film and multimedia space. But unfortunately, the money does not go to black arts development.
Yeah.
The last crossroad is this one. That and this is summarized by somebody called Michael Harrison in 2018. He was giving a TEDx lecture. Just to summarize him, he says, apart from computers that can read medical journals, perform diagnosis on patients, no human being would compete with what is beginning to come out of the artificial intelligence world.
Okay.
And secondly, that already in the creative arena, we have software that writes music for videos,
Oh.
for films, for adverts. And in the film world recently, a computer produced a trailer after being exposed to 100 samples of trailers for the recent film. So we are at a point where, as artists, as Black people, we should ask ourselves, how do we engage a world
Yes.
that is further marginalizing creativity, but at the same time, it is appropriating Black creativity into a white world. His concerns are expressed this way, that these machines, when they fail disastrously. And it becomes a matter of interpretation or meaning. In other words, they can be technically designed, but they don't have inside them the sense of human interpretation and human meaning.
Okay.
And ultimately, let me say, the challenge really is we all bring up our children before the television. We in the education system don't have arts education. South Africa in particular is not in control. South Africa is not in control of its cyberspace. If you mention Facebook, you mention Google, you mention WhatsApp, we don't have a South African Google. And so if we don't have a South African Google, how do we then create an environment where machines can interpret and find meaning that can show going forward Black expression in its authentic and evolving manner? Thank you.
Thank you. That punchline on which you left is precisely the question we are trying to address. How can we find platforms, mechanisms, techniques that can reflect the Black voice, the Black visual, Black culture in its truly authentic and natural voice? I really have to thank you, because I'm sure even the participants can see here that you've given this subject a lot of thought. You took us to the ancient, to the middle stages, all the way up to the modern and the present with your remarks around Black Panther. And you've covered the whole gamut of the arts. from music, sculpture, paintings, and movies and music. Thank you very much, Ntate Makhene. When we invite most of our panelists, when we have invited them to share insights with us on Black History Month, they've done precisely what we have done. Apulaine. Okay, thank you very much. Sis Nomfundo?
Hi.
Yeah, you're still here, huh?
Yes, I'm still here.
Yes. This is our Tete namhlanje. We will leave the singing and the music for later. Yes.
I'll put my banking details at the bottom of the screen in the chat.
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
For me to sing, when I come onto the AZAPO platform.
Don't send it to me. We have a national treasurer, so I will link you up with it.
I'll collect donations, but yeah, perhaps just to greet everybody.
Thank you.
And to thank Ntate Makhene for that incredible presentation. As we've already mentioned earlier, I am a jazz musician and a music academic by training. And so I suppose for me, when I'm invited on this kind of a platform, many a times I've put notes, write things, and I write presentations.
Yes.
Microphone is not muted.
Hello, may I address myself to the other participants? Please, let's mute our microphones. And I don't want to say our videos as well, but if you can, please mute the videos as well, because we want to respect the panelists when they are on the platform. So let's not disrupt them because it disturbs their train of thought. Sis Nomfundo.
Thank you very much for that. So that's my background, and so normally when I'm invited to address people, I've realized that there's no point in writing things down, because yes. I never really look at the notes. Yes. I don't think, and I think it speaks to the jazz musician in me.
Oh, you are a teacher, so you do this every day, so it's just in your head.
I'm an improviser. I dabble in the art of improvisation. That's what I do. So
okay.
I've written a few things on the side. When I peek to the side here, I'm just looking at at a few notes. But I suppose for me, I rather want to invite everybody on this platform to perhaps think about and reflect about this notion of Black music.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And what is Black music, and the fact that there is something that is inherently contentious or uncomfortable, especially in the jazz domain. I mean, when we speak about classical music, we know undisputedly that it is a European music. Okay. It is a Western European art form. And so, and people participate in that, people from all walks of life, from all creeds and races. But for some reason, when we speak about something like jazz, which really plays a very meaningful role in the history of Black life and in the Black lived experience, we tend to be a little bit shy or a little bit cautious and too careful about really claiming, that music as Black music.
Okay. Yeah.
And so if we just kind of backtrack a little bit to, a time gone by, when we think about jazz, for instance, well, we say it is an African-American art form. And we then also realize and know that Africans were transported abroad as slaves. And these African slaves abroad were working the fields. And they then started to find a language musically where they could communicate with each other in the playing fields without the white masters quite understanding what they were saying. And so that's where this practice of what we call call and response comes from. And so the one worker on this side of the field will sing a line to another person on the other side, and they would sing it back. And this was the way in which not only were those slaves really communicating with each other in environments that were really, really undesirable. I mean, oppressive. But they were able to find a language where they could communicate, and a language that the white master couldn't quite intercept. And so that's where this call and response, and we still find call and response as a really key ingredient. I mean, when you think about struggle songs and you think about Amakwicho, they still have that call and response, right?
Fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. And so then, you know, and then you get the blues, right? And then you get the blues, you know, people will say now, you know, rhythm and blues, which is R&B. Nowadays, we think about R&B and we think about, you know, more in the pop sense. Like, I mean, I grew up listening to, you know, or Brandy or Joe or, yeah, you know, that kind of smooth, but rhythm and blues, you know, you talk about that blues.
I thought you grew up listening to Nat King Cole.
Well, that's the original rhythm and blues, is it not? Right? Because, because what we take, because we've got to trace it back.
All right.
And so then you get the era of the blues, right? You know, your Bessie Smiths and really at the core of the blues, which was also just,
man. Yes,
you know, at the core of the blues, you know, the blues have this tinge about unrequited love. Right. A lot of the time, the lyrical content of the blues is really about unrequited love. It laments, you know, and you think about, I had his name on the tip of my tongue. Jamie Foxx played him in the biopic. He's blind. What's his name?
Oh, I see.
Yes, yeah, it slipped me now completely.
The guy with the bow tie, yes.
That's right. Yes, I mean, it's such. Yeah, it's one of those.
Ray Charles.
That's right. Yeah, right. And so you're tracing it back to that era, but that's where really jazz emanated from. It emanated from this Black experience, right? And it emanated from an environment where the African slaves in America were really putting together the rhythms of Africa, the drumming and the rhythm and the percussion. And they were able to find a way to infuse it with Western sort of melodic riffs and Western harmony and melody. And the blue, and then jazz basically then started to emerge from that. And that's a very sort of summarized you know, context of where jazz comes from. I mean, you could go into much deeper context than that. And then, you know, New Orleans, which was a port city. And so it was really the prime spot to have and to perform jazz and to have, but jazz had a thing about it in a sense that in America, people, and I'm going to bring it to South Africa very quickly. I'm going to tie it into how it affects the South African context. What happened was that, you know, in America, because Black life, much like in South Africa, was oppressed life. And so white people then became very uncomfortable with the fact that here was an art form that was coming from Black people and from Black life. And so it became, and that's why it, you know, over time, it's become this contentious issue, and people don't really want to call jazz Black music. And I think it's interesting because in that time, in order for Black artists to perform in white spaces, the music had to be palatable to white audiences. And so at every given moment, Black artistry was always mediated by white men. Right. And so I sit and I think, you know, when I think about jazz and I think about where it posits in culture and in race, and I think about, and sometimes people say, you know, but jazz is not Black, you know, it's a lot of things. It's a culmination. It's everybody's. And I think, well, ultimately, Black people had everything stripped from them. Right. We had materially, our land stripped from us, you know, our homes, the evictions. If you're thinking about, you know, Meadowlands, and you're thinking about Sophia Town, and you can hear Thandi Klassen singing about, you know, that really, really sad, you know, ballad of Sophia Town, you know, when Black people in South Africa had to be relocated and moved and bulldozed, right? And so white people were able to strip us of the physical, our land, but also they stripped us of our history, because they are the ones who write the history or wrote the history. And so Black artistry was always, always at the mercy of white domination, historically. And I would even argue as far as to say that that still permeates, you know, that still permeates the industry now.
Oh, yeah.
You know, it's not gone. It's not really gone. It just wears a different face and a different coat, so to speak. So for me, I suppose the key thing is to say that we need to assign music, and we need to assign it to who it belongs to in innovation and creation. When we say Black music, we must be comfortable with the notion of calling our music Black music. Because no one ever really questions or interrogates or argues when the Europeans say that opera is ours. You know, we don't question it. You know, and we will dabble in performing opera, and we will sing it in German, and we will sing it in Italian. But it's very clear who it belongs to. But when we talk about jazz, it becomes a difficult situation, and maybe a lot of it stems from the fact that Black people do not have access to music education. And Ntate Motsumi actually you know, alluded to this in his presentation, to say that the arts are not adequately taught in South Africa, and neither were they taught, obviously, back in the time. And so what you found was that these African American recordings started to come, you know, were smuggled into South Africa. And that's how you had the likes of, you know, Winston Mankunkungozi, you know, falling in love with the music of John Coltrane. That's why then you started to have, you know, Omam Sophie Mgcina, Omam Miriam Makeba, you know, Satima B. Benjamin, all these incredible women who were really instrumental in jazz, falling in love with the art form and the voices of Sarah Vaughan and the voices of Billie Holiday and Nina Simone, because they were actually listening to these recordings that were smuggled in. Because remember, the apartheid regime did not really, you know, there was no television. Black people were not allowed to watch TV. You couldn't own one. You know, and the radio was just full of propaganda. You know, and so what happened was that, you know, in the Marabi era, you know, people then started to go, well, Black South Africans started to feel like they were, you know, they could identify with American music, and they could identify with jazz, because in America, jazz was a struggle music, and in South Africa, jazz became a struggle music, right? And so then, you know, what happened was that there was this vibrant energy in the 50s in Johannesburg, and not just in Johannesburg, but in the Eastern Cape as well, where this culture now of South African jazz started to really come about. And it didn't really matter whether you were, what was beautiful about that time actually was that it didn't matter whether you liked jazz or not, but because it was so akin to Black identity, you know, you absorbed it. So our great grandparents listened to it, and when Abdullah Ibrahim would play Manenberg, we understood, you know, there was something about it that was so so real and so kind of tangible. And we were not really fixated with genres. Now we're too fixated with genres. No, that's pop, that's jazz, that's gospel, that's
too purist at times.
And too purist at times, right? And so that's what happened in the Marabi era, you know, where South African musicians started to go, okay, well, actually, we've got something of our own here, because not only are we importing, you know, swing and bebop, but we've got umpaqanga, you know, we've got penny whistle, right? We've got isqathamiya, and how is it that we can then start to formulate our own musical heritage and our own musical identity? you know, and so then, you know, then you got, you know, Marabi and Nkashio and all kinds of really incredible styles of music, right? And I think the whole issue of it being black, it not being black, in South Africa, we didn't really struggle with that initially because jazz in South Africa was the lifeline of Black life. And I say that because people died and people sacrificed, you know, through their art forms to speak and to fight against the apartheid regime. And, you know, and the likes of, you know, Jonas Gwangwa, you know, if you think about Bheki Mseleku, you think about Dollar Brand, you think about, you know, Chris McGregor and the Brotherhood of Breath, you know, you think about Kaifa Semenya Letambulu, you think about Satima B. Benjamin and all these artists who went into exile, right? Because their music no longer, I mean, not that their music no longer was appreciated here, but they needed to, they needed to spread the word about what was happening in South Africa. And I think the beauty about Black History and Black History Month musically is that it reminds us of the parallels of the African experience and the American experience. Because while we were going through apartheid, the Americans were going through the civil rights movement, you know, and that gave that brought great friendships. You know, if I think about Miriam Makeba and her close friendship with Nina Simone, you know, and really kind of singing and expressing Black life through song at great price, you know, and at great sacrifice. So that for me really stands out. And I think, you know, I would like to see an environment and a situation where we are less apprehensive about claiming that which is Black artistically. And it's not just in terms of music, but even when we think about theater,
yes,
and when we think about film, and when we think about, you know, everything in the art spectrum, we are too generous and we are too modest and too sharing with our identity artistically. And we've got to be careful about that. And we've got to guard it more jealously. You know, we've got to guard Black music more jealously without saying that other races and other creeds, they can practice the music, but we must be sure and with conviction to know who are the innovators of Black music, right? Who are the innovators and the creators of Black music and the people at the forefront of Black music. And then secondly, I think the other thing that I want to point out, and I think it's also something that that I'm struggling with currently in the modern context in South Africa, is the notion of documentation. Who gets to write about Black art?
Oh, yes.
You know, I see that man is laughing because he knows I've vented and ranted about this before on other platforms, to say that who gets to write about Black art and what gives the authority to those who write about it to write about it. And perhaps they don't need the authority or the permission, but I do definitely feel that Black people need to start writing about Black art. Because, and I say this because I found something while I was doing some research to say that I'll just read the quote because I find it quite interesting. It says that it is critics who in the short run function as the custodians of taste and tradition. They determine what is good and what is bad, often to the point where musicians who are held in low critical favor find it very difficult to find work. Right? So it means that then we must be more vigilant about those who write about Black artists. Because those who write about Black artists have a very direct influence and impact on an artist's journey, trajectory, and reputation, right? And so I think that it is important for academia, and not just academia, but even the broader education sector, because in the arts, you know, it's not just about studying it academically. There's various ways in which we can learn and study craft. But it is important that we don't always only glorify performance, but we must also start to give a space to documenting and to writing. And this, for me, I think has become a lot more apparent, you know, as we lose great Black musicians and great Black artists, poets, actors and actresses, you know, and when we see, you know, how they are written about and who gets to write about them, and the inaccuracies in how these artists' lives and works are documented, you know, it really makes one sit up and kind of go, it has to stop, you know. And so I think it's an important thing as we commemorate, or we come to the end of commemorating Black History Month, that if we as Black artists and we as Black writers do not take the pen, and if we do not take the time to read, to research, to find out our own truth, you know, in terms of what is our heritage, right? What is it that belongs to us rightfully, and we write it, you know, then we're going to always be at the mercy of white critics, you know, and white curators. You know, I'm thinking about, you know, that famous show, Alf Herbert's show of the 50s. I think Hugh Masekela was part of the cast, and very many others, African Jazz and Variety, you know. And you think about also King Kong. Yes, Todd Machikiza wrote the music, but there was always a white man in between who determines whether this music and this craft is palatable to the white audience. Right? There was always this person in between, this force in between Black artists and the audience. And so if we do not eradicate that middle person, not only in terms of not having them produce, but we have to also get them out of the way in terms of documenting and writing, you know. So for me, I think those are the critical things that I think, you know, I personally, as an academic, am really interested in. And also this notion that, and I see my colleagues fall into this, especially, you know, younger practitioners, you know, thinking that in order for you to really kind of express your art, you've got to have big English or fancy English. And I find that a lot of our culture and our heritage now is locked up in big English, because when we read about it, it's most often through the eyes of musicologists who have the language. And so somehow, you know, if they then kind of write about our music and our heritage from a very exotic and a very sort of theorized fashion, you know, and it reminds me, because a couple of years ago, I traveled to the Eastern Cape to visit Omama Bomnokol, who specialize in overtone singing. And in the deep sort of rural Eastern Cape, in Mount Frere. And these incredible women have traveled abroad. They've traveled, you know, all over Europe, but always through the gaze of anthropologists and musicologists, and oftentimes white, you know, who will come and they will sit and they will visit, you know, and they will switch on their recorders and they will record these women, and they will write about them, and they will interpret them, and they will write it, and they will then produce these big publications, you know, not really understanding at the nub, you know, exactly what those women are doing. But until such time when we take the time, you know, to go and learn about our own music, you know, outside of mainstream urban spaces, we'll always be on the back foot. And even more so now that the digital world is really advancing at a rapid rate, you know. So perhaps I will sort of leave it at that in the interest of time, and then we can obviously expand the discussion, you know, through the conversation. But just to summarize it, that really we need to reclaim Black, that which is Black, and not be afraid to call it Black music, Black film, Black art, Black poetry. And also that we need to start writing, because those who write influence those who are written about, and how they are perceived in their larger environment.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Sis Nomfundo. Oh, well, what a whirlwind of a presentation, tying nicely into that one earlier by Ntate Motsumi Makhene. I like your emphasis that we should not be modest about claiming Black spaces, Black voices, because somehow post 1994, when you talk about Black, a misconception exists that no, we are still in the pre-apartheid. This one we call it post-apartheid. I'm not even sure if pre-apartheid is the right word, but in the apartheid era, and it's because we somehow don't seem to understand what we mean by Black. The other day we had a conversation on Black ideology, and we've been very deliberate as AZAPO in this month of February to actually use the prefix Black to define our topics, because we want our people to say, but this is ours, this is our humanity, this is our conversation. As Lififi Tladi says, Ari Tebe, this is all about that. We are conversing amongst ourselves today about our art and the things that have meaning for us. That professor that we had the other day raised a very interesting notion for me, the notion of thinking while planting. I think he was talking about some Caribbean revolutionary intellectual who was saying, you know what, as we go about our life, we must also think about what our condition is in society. As we are planting, occupied about producing food, let's also think about, the politics, the economy, all of these things, because I often get a sense that, when you are a musician, all you want to do is to sing, but you don't want to do the thinking behind the singing. If you are an artist, all you want to do is to paint. You don't want to do the thinking behind the painting. So this notion of thinking whilst you are singing, thinking whilst you are performing, I think it's a very important notion that he shared with us the other day. Our next speaker was going to be Ntate Molefe Pheto, and he had joined in earlier, but now he seems to have disappeared, and it is such a pity, because I wanted us to try and we tried to find some of our Black filmmakers. We had approached them. There are others that we obviously thought, no, but they wouldn't fit the bill in this kind of discussion. I hope you understand what I mean. And then there are those that we had approached, and others said, look, I think I'll participate as a participant. I don't know if they are here, if there's anyone that can make any input about film, or as someone said, film. I'm still Bantu, so my phonetics are still very much African phonetics, so I call it film. Because I wanted us to try and zoom into that, because it comes very easy for us to talk probably about literature, maybe about music, but as you say, Sis Nomfundo, who researches Black film? What image, what narrative do we have about Black film? And the issue about us being what's the word, erased out of these conversations also is important. I don't know if you'll be able to see this book. This is Mapantsula. That maybe my screen doesn't show it. This is Mapantsula. I bought it some time back. I think it was either the early 90s or late 80s when I arrived in Johannesburg, immediately after it was unbanned. And when I bought it at that time, it had Oliver Schmitz and Thomas Mokhotlane as the writers, because it contains the screenplay. Now, interestingly, as I was preparing myself for this conversation, there's a very interesting page there about Black films or South African films. So I then got to Mapantsula, and I just see that the credit only goes to Oliver Schmitz and Thomas Mokhotlane. Somehow his name doesn't appear there. And I ask myself, oh, okay, so this is what happened. And that is precisely where you come about the mediation of our arts. There were always people who mediated it. and they thought, okay, this we will include, this we will exclude. Because the question we must ask is, if the book that was published by Corso, say 30 years ago, has the name of Thomas Mokhotlan, why is it that on Wikipedia, on Google, when you try and research about the screenplay of Mapantsula, the name of Thomas Mokhotlan is no longer credited there as one of the writers or whatever his role was, but it doesn't appear there. Now, that's where I wanted us to try and have a conversation. Let me check with any of the participants here if there's anyone that is, you know, knowledgeable. You don't necessarily have to have studied it, but somebody who can lead us on black film. You've already started, Ntate Mokhene, with the commentary on Black Panther and all of that. And I looked at Black Panther, I saw some of the mountains there and some of the visual, and I thought that this looks like Lesotho. Okay, yet when you read about the locations on the Black Panther, I mean, I've been to Kwato, I have seen those horse riders there, way up the mountain. And I could see when our eyes, because I took my boys, especially to go and watch it. So I looked, I mean, I watched it with a critical eye. And I thought, but that looks like Lesotho. But yet, when I read about the movie and they give all of those credits about locations, you don't hear anything about Lesotho, you don't hear anything about Kwakwa. And I think even the language there, you can pick up that some of the language is South African, but it's not credited. So this is what happens. As you say, the people who write decide who do we erase, who do we include. Okay. Maybe we should have an interlude. and let me just check with Ntate Pheto if they are struggling or whether we should move on with another conversation. Sis Nomfundo, let me see what I can share here. Pardon me, I'm not very good with these things. I normally call on the experts here at home to help me. Let me see if I can get there. There's Bayateta there. A bit of Bayateta will do at this time, I guess. Let me screen share. No, it's not here. It's not. Just pardon me. Let's see if I can get to it. Doesn't look like I can get to it. It doesn't look like I can get to it. It's here, but all right. Let's pause it there and go on with our conversation. Ntate Mokhene, do you want to come in? Maybe let's try and zoom in on black films or on black film or cinematography. I mean, you are the expert on this. Maybe just let's touch on it, even if we don't have a filmmaker here or an actor, but we are also critics. We see these things and maybe we can try and make sense of them.
I'm not an expert, Rre Moemedi.
Hey.
Nobody should be an expert.
Okay.
When it comes to when it comes to matters,
yes,
of black arts and
our own matters, yes,
and black cultural development.
That's right. Yes, I agree.
You know, just two things. One, in the 80s, there was a debate that was led by Professor Kabin Ngoma.
Mm-hmm.
It was a debate around whether universities should continue with this idea of ethnomusicology.
Okay.
Because by its nature, it tends to suggest that universities go into the rural areas and townships to document and also to help structure black arts.
Mm.
And part of the debate led to a suggestion, which has not been taken up by universities in this country, and I don't think they will.
Mm.
A suggestion that rural masters, whether of music, of dance, of visual arts and craft, should be allowed to, just like Oscar Peterson, come into a university and you're a professor of what you master as a master of Black arts.
Okay.
Universities are publishing institutions. Therefore, they own whatever knowledge that comes to them. And the contradiction will be, what happens if Honale Rebuom wa Kiba ya Ramasemola coming to be a professor and being recognized as an authority, who publishes his works? This goes then to your question about, I call it Wakanda, the Black Panther. The sites are not recognized, the physical sites as in shooting sites.
Okay, okay.
When you look at Gauteng and the Western Cape, they have film commissions that are very active, where
Yes.
there are streets of buildings, the whole architecture and spatial environment should be published by the South African government.
Okay.
In other words, the South African government on behalf of the people own the land that is used by a filmmaker to produce unique visuals that are animated to give that experience of a film.
Okay.
We just like with Rooibos controversy, we don't come out strongly to say we own the land, we own the plants, we own the animals, we are the people. So you can appropriate and even expropriate without paying for it on the basis of an agreement.
Oh, yeah. Okay, I can.
When you look at Black Panther, for instance, there are very unique scenes that could not have been imagined or designed by any other person except a Black person. For instance, when you take the scene of the protagonist dying, the Sun King.
Yes, yes.
No, he's not dying. When he goes into a spiritual realm and meets his father, T'Challa. Just the word itself, T'Challa, they call it, is a translation of T'Challa.
Yes, yes, yeah. Okay.
So it becomes unique and special and esoteric, and people like it. And yet somebody should have been recognized for, one, creating that scene. Secondly, creating the words that support it. Thirdly, where have you heard in the Western world, in the European world, the connection between the living and the living dead?
Yes, yes, yes.
So ultimately, this is about publishing. It's about ownership of language, expression, of physical environments, or even the intangible environment of the spirits. Because what makes that film is the magic, for instance, of the vibranium, which is a blue stone. Okay? When you research deeply as to where you would find such ideas of a stone that has magic, which is blue, you find it in Africa.
Yes.
The producers or the researchers of the film also have gone back into the maps and historical places in Africa. The idea of Wakanda is very close to Uganda. But what's wrong in actually saying that the place of magic is Uganda itself. When you look at old maps, you will see, not far away from Uganda, some funny place called Wakanda.
Yeah.
This could be a mistake of a European as they develop these cartographies.
Yeah. Okay.
But it then becomes an asset of mystique when films are made.
Yeah.
So it comes down to who publishes, who pays for it, who owns it, who propagates it. Thank you.
All right. Okay, now thanks. I just want to open it now to everybody who's here, and maybe we should just stick to the subject of film and cinema. In preparing for this conversation here tonight, as I said, I did a bit of reading, and what was amazing for me is that the very first film that you could call a black film was published in 1949, if my recollection is correct of what I had read. And that was an adaptation of Jim Comes to Joburg, the stage play. I think it was published in Europe or elsewhere, but there was an external connection. And they called it African Jim. Ntate Motsumi, you may know about this yourself.
I've heard about Jim Come to Joburg. I have not seen it. I've seen Quite a Beloved Country.
Okay, yeah. No, I mean, it was African Jim, and I think Medoli Ratebe, Dan Twala, and somebody Maile featured in that film. And then there were others like Dingaka with Ken Gampu. And then later on, we had, I'll recall the others. But it's interesting as you study, just that trail of filmmaking where Africans feature, that foreigners come in, they start to believe that, no, but we can't just have films about the voortrekkers that and others that celebrate probably British colonialism, because the first film, South African film, if you can call it that, was focusing on the diamond industry in Kimberley. So that's the first film that is credited as a South African produced film way back. And then I think others like the Voortrekkers come in, and then you have African Jim. Yes, and you can clearly see how prior to the National Party taking power, the films are sort of a mixture between English, bring in some African actors, tell the African story, and then maybe one on African nationalism. But subsequent to the National Party taking power, a lot of the films which tend to be exclusively Afrikaans, the producers, the actors, all of that, by Jamie Ace and the others, now come to the fore, which then tells you that when you are a government and you take power, you start realizing that the arts are important, and the arts must recover hidden stories, because the Afrikaners probably felt, when the English were in charge, they were not telling our story. We're going to tell our stories ourselves. Now, post 1994, I mean, we don't see that kind of development, as save for the crude aspect of Afrikaner nationalism. But one would have expected that there would have been a deliberate effort on the part of the new government to say, what, the black story on film has been suppressed for a long time. Where it was told, it was your spoof films, as they called it, where, we black people come in and they play some exaggerated roles that parody black life and all of that, which is what the genre that Leon Schuster published a lot of. Most of us, well, they make you laugh, but when you look at it and you say, but a rational black person doesn't quite behave like that. So it gives people an impression that we are these hedonist, fun-loving, and jocular people all the time. But you don't have films that talk about drama, romance, you know, that celebrate Black life. And that's the challenge we have. Now, of late, the whole point about the conversation was to look at the kind of films that are also coming out, particularly on television. I mean, most of us are exposed to this famous channel called Moja Love. Who gives Moja Love content? You know, is it Black film producers who feel, well, you know what, this is my occupation, and the people that are buying material are your DSTV guys, and they want us to produce these types of films. So because I need to earn my keep as well, I'm going to produce it. The point that you made, Sis Nomfundo, about the mediators, you know, they tell you what kind of script you must write, and you write that type of script, and you say, well, as long as it pays the bills, I will do it. But is that the way we should be approaching our arts? Is that the way we should be approaching filmmaking? Of course, there are others who are attempting to produce an alternative genre of film, and we see young Black filmmakers like Kagiso Lidiga coming in, trying to project real Black life and not really playing up to the who's that now? What's the English expression? Who pays the piper plays the tune, something like that. You know. Now, can we have more of those kinds of films that reflect the realism of Black life? But let me open the conversation. I was just trying to get a starter into it, and then we could invite the other participants here to make their inputs. So let's have an open conversation, ladies and gentlemen. Spend a little bit of time on film, cinema, television, acting, and all of those topics. So I'm going to invite you, if there's anybody that wants to have a view on that. Please just feel free to unmute yourself and make a comment or share something with us, and then we'll keep going with it that way. Or you can raise your hand. If you can raise your hand, I am Ntate Motsumi Makhene. Please come in.
One of my observations, I listen to classics,
Okay.
and at one stage, I got hit right in the forehead by realizing that the percussions in the George Frederick Handel water music were not European.
Okay.
And then I started researching to find out exactly where did Handel get his rhythm from. And I discovered that Handel was an investor in a ship that was conveying slaves from Africa to the Americas and England. So it's not actually quite clear that this man lived in Africa, but it is quite unmistakable from his music that he has had a very great influence in terms of how he's approaching his rhythm from the African continent. Okay. So my submission is we need not only look at how we affirm ourselves, but also go out there and reveal the kind of wealth that we have shared with the world, okay. and then claim it, because the narrative has always been that which begin to say we must be belittled all the time as people of inferior capabilities, while in actual fact the real wealth that we have distributed to the world is submerged in plagiaristic efforts. That's my submission.
Oh, thank you very much, Ntate Moemedi Kepadisa. What a gem of a contribution. Anyone else that wants to come in? We've opened this time now for the participants and everybody that's here. Or if you want to share an item, be it a poem, play some melody from an instrument, you know, this is about the arts. So let's see what we can offer. A particular interest for me, building on the point that you have raised, Ntate Motsumi, is on the subject of sacred music. Because I think the original composers, if we may call them that, because, you know, composition is not only what has been published. Black people have been composing music through the ages. But oftentimes when we talk about the composers, we talk about those who's got a score and what have you. I mean, I'm not a musician, so these are words that I learned from my kids who are into this, and one of them is on here. But what the little that I have read is that our original, or the first composers of formal music, notation and all of those things, were, you know, well, religious people, people who were converts into Christianity, because they were sent to these schools and they were taught that, look, even the original teachers, you know, Abu Koza, Amavangeli and all of those things. So when they were sent to school, they were taught first to come and, to study the Bible and to come and teach natives the Bible. So those were the first teachers. And then another responsibility they were given was to compose music. So they had to compose hymns or translate European hymns to African rhythms and textures, so that they can be much more palatable to the converts. And some of those songs, we take them for granted today, and we don't even research them and say, but songs like Izalisi Dingalako, Modimo Abuikanyo, and all of those were composed by these African composers. And I have a particular interest in that because I'm spiritual, but also because the melody is just so great. Yet we don't have our musicians and researchers saying, you know, who wrote this popular song called Modimo Abuikanyo? You know, immortalize them, talk about them, so that our kids can learn that, you know, we have also, our ancestors also created some of these timeless pieces. And the conversation is all about that. For instance, we have an African music conservatory in South Africa. I hear there's one at Rhodes, but I'm not sure how comprehensive and expansive it is. But what are the Black universities doing to conserve music in the different localities? The University of Limpopo should be trying to do that with artists and composers and the music of Limpopo. University of Northwest should be doing that. Now, Rhodes will obviously focus mostly on, you know, your Bika T Chamzash, you know, and your Mahapelwas and the others who have written formal music. But, you know, those who were just writing for the church, who didn't think that, you know, this music one day could be, and even our DJs, who's this now? DJs Boo took some classic song, made it very popular. But why aren't we getting our musicians to say, let's take Izalisi Dingalako, make it more current, you know, put in new instruments and all of this, so that, you know, we pay homage to it as a very important piece and contribution to Black music and all of that. I have my boy here who has just joined in. He's a practitioner of sacred music, more into the classics. So as part of getting this conversation going, because I don't see more hands, I don't know if you can invite him or you'll feel that I'm putting him on the spot. But if he has something to say or to make a contribution here, I would really appreciate it. Take it off. Oh, the choir is there.
No, it's a background picture.
Oh, it's a background picture. I thought you brought the whole choir, man. Jeez, why didn't you bring the choir? Okay, say something about this conversation we are having in the arts. I've already given a disclaimer, so I'm not trying to sell him. I mean, okay.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, as you speak about African composers who wrote during their education in the missionary schools, you're very right in the sense that oftentimes when we sing these songs, we don't take time in teaching, in telling people. This is a song, for example, Liza Liza by Tio Soga, who went overseas and came back and wrote about God's spirit coming with him as he comes back into his native land. But I think one of the challenges for me that I have is that the church space in South Africa is really now being led by Black people, and we have been put in these historically white, dare I say, violent spaces, in which we are being looked at from both the white gaze, the mediator, as well as from our parents and our grandparents who are expecting you to change this thing. And it's very eminent. I mean, I work at the Cathedral from grade 5 to grade 10 that came in. And if you give them a piece of music by William Byrd or by Thomas Delassus, they immediately disconnect. Because it's not something that they know, it's not something that they appreciate, it's not something that they understand. Mara, we give them, again, pieces like Liza Liza Dingalako, we give them pieces like Bawati Klosomandla, pieces which they can relate to and they can understand. And all of a sudden, the music learning, the process of learning music becomes better. Rose University here has just started a course on African music. So one can take a full credit course, graduate with IMS focusing on African instruments and African music. And very interestingly, all the lectures that they've gotten to teach these instruments are lecturers who are working at it at home. So they bring invited lecturers from outside to come and teach the people. Now, one of the debates which we're having is that, these people are getting paid as if they are contractual staff because they don't have a degreed paper on their hand, and yet they're teaching people to people graduate with a BMAS in African music from a lecturer who doesn't have a degree, and yet the university policy don't approve of paying teachers who are practitioners and really top of their games. They should be getting PhD because they're inventing knowledge, they're inventing new systems of learning which will be applied. So it is very much a critical discussion, Orlando, and a challenge amongst young Black African music practitioners about how do we go about with our teachings and making the music which was created by our forefathers and the people who came before us worth being studied. Giving reasons, giving academic rigor to these compositions and these theories.
Okay, now thank you very much. Very interesting input from yourselves as well about how I don't know if there's something that you can call an innate appreciation or innate sound. But speaking for myself, when somebody sings a song which has got my rhythmic culture, I can feel it without really knowing what the song is. And I think it's because when you grow up, you internalize these sounds, these images, these rhythms, and I think it reinforces the point that you are making, Tiki, so that when you work with young children, they immediately connect with our traditional African hymns, whereas if you give them hymns composed with a European style or European sense, they struggle. But the challenge now is, how do we see the future? More and more of us are now starting to integrate into suburban life. We live our tradition. I know stuff. I sometimes miss singing. What's this other famous song that they like singing at the church where I was born? Well, we'll get to it. We'll get to it later. kubo bonke othixo akekho njengaye, you know. Now you even start losing the memory of the verses, you know, because the church, the Methodist church where I go to here in Johannesburg, say that if you want to sing those songs, you must come to church at 12 o'clock. But if you're gonna come to church at 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock, we're gonna give you a different type of music on the menu. So those are some of the spatial challenges as well that we are confronted with, that we are trying to mediate. Whilst conscious that we must preserve our art, our souls, our music, and our culture. These are some of the challenges that, you know, the building of a new nation throws out. We are all for it, but let not the building of the new nation result in the further marginalization of Black culture, because as things seem to be going, our languages are not taught at the majority of, or well, at most of the schools where our kids are going to, because they now attend schools in suburbia. So increasingly, African languages are not being spoken in the circles that we inhabit. And we are saying, you know, those things define us. They are our identity. How do we preserve them? Now, music carries language. Film carries language. Art carries language. So all of these things are interrelated. Okay, anyone else who wants to make a comment? Who wants to come in? Is this Nondobeko?
Okay.
Or is there somebody that wants? Ntate Motsumi?
Yeah, I wanted to make a comment on.
All right, thanks. Please feel free, because we now are left with about 14 minutes, so we are tapering towards the end. Yes, it's a pity we just got an update from Ntate Molefe Bra Phin. They are saying now it's a problem with the network. I wish we had taken him when he had come in earlier, but you know, we'll find another occasion where we'll invite him and then he will share his thoughts with us. And our apologies to him and to all others who have joined in to listen to him. Okay, go ahead, sir.
On the question of preservation of Black arts, yes, the African urban reality is going to grow, and it will grow very fast because it is encouraged to grow, because it is a methodology for diminishing and ultimately destroying the source, which is rural arts. Even people in rural areas have begun to have taste for urban life and ignore heritage. The only way to preserve and promote and propagate African or Black arts is through living heritage. We have to create spaces, even before you talk about cyberspace, about online. I mean, these days, streaming, everybody wants to be on online streaming because we think this is a new way to communicate the arts. The arts are based on human sensibilities to innovate and create new work and be able to maintain identity. You need to keep live arts alive, whether they be in craft form, so that we can buy utilities rather than buying China from China. Let us buy the utensils and other things, cutlery and whatever you eat, that has been produced here. Now, manufacturing has died in South Africa. We tend to buy things from China. That's our life. So we need to go back to supporting rural arts, craft, and design. Secondly, in urban areas, and this is not new, the development of Marabi, Kwela, Famo, and all other forms of urban expression and entertainment were not introduced to the township by Europeans. These were created by Africans as they interact in the urban space. But today, you find that most expression is electronic and not live.
Mm.
And so we watch rather than do. How do you then feel who you are and express who you are if you're not going to keep a living heritage?
Mm.
Because in the townships, this is there. In the suburbs, it can be created. So
Okay.
my response is, let us find a way to promote, support, defend, and propagate living heritage. Because
Okay.
that's where the future is. As somebody said, we have to be on a campaign for original futures. In other
Okay.
words, Sankofa, it means creating the future through the past.
Mm. Mm. Thank you, Sis Nomfundo. Any comment you have to make? I know you've been sitting there quietly listening.
Yes. No,
Yeah.
no, I think a couple of things that were really very important that came through in the discussions. But also, I think, one of the things, just talking about church music, is that the church also needs to be a little bit firmer in the stance, with its stance when it comes to the repertoire of church.
Okay.
Because the church in and of itself does not really acknowledge the copyright of the hymns a lot of the time, unless one is going to go through the hymn book and really look and see that, oh, this song was sung by. So a lot of the hymns that we hear and that we sing, we don't really know, we don't know who wrote them. And so we sing them because they are church hymns. And what then happens is that, popular artists cover those hymns, with house beats and drum beats and all kinds of things. And then in the copyright registration, those hymns fall under traditional, which is then public domain.
Oh, okay.
Right. And so what happens is that then, that copyright is lost to the creators of those hymns and their offspring. And so I think the church also needs to perhaps embark on a project of educating, its members about the repertoire of the church and the hymns and where they come from and who wrote them. Because that cannot rest upon the universities to do that. It cannot rest on the researcher, to do that. The church itself needs to actually go on a campaign, to teach itself and to teach its members about the repertoire, And then secondly, we also have to be careful not to, I always feel that we're moving towards this, there's this notion that says until African music and indigenous music is in a format that is understood in Western terms, whether it's notation or whether it's taught in a university, then it's almost like that format legitimizes indigenous music, and it doesn't.
Okay.
Indigenous African music does not necessarily have to be in a university space in order for it to be credible or in order for it to enjoy status. Because the reality is that not every South African is going to walk through the halls of a university. So then how do we educate those who are not in the university about the music? So that means we need to find other spaces where we can teach about indigenous and other modes of knowledge transference. Otherwise, if we put this burden of teaching it in the universities, we almost kind of, we should do it, but it should not only, be at that level where we then go, oh, this is legitimate.
Okay.
So we need to find spaces in rural areas. We need to find spaces in urban areas that focus on indigenous art in order for it to thrive. It cannot be that, universities legitimize indigenous music or indigenous art. Our art is too big and too important, to be legitimized by academics. So we are the ones who need to teach wherever we are. We need to teach it. Otherwise, we'll never get there. We'll never get there. So that's my parting shot for the night.
All right, thank you very much. I see you've triggered some hands, so I'm gonna take them. I'll start with Galaxy 831. I can't see your name. Please come in.
Yes,
if you can go on video,
thank you for
please.
the opportunity.
Okay, yeah, welcome.
All right. All right, thank you. I'm Reverend Moemedi Kepadisa.
Okay,
yes.
Welcome, Reverend, yes.
Yes, I'm intrigued by what our sister is saying. It is true that the majority of our hymns are not recognizing most of our Black people. I come from a church called the United Congregational Church of Southern Africa, which is dominant in Botswana and Mafikeng, around those areas.
Yes.
And I was a minister in Makhobistad for some time.
All
Now,
right.
but I'm saying what is happening now in varsity from theological point of view, we find that we are talking about decolonization of theology. And one of the projects is also to look into the hymns that were written by our people, but you will find that it only acknowledges the missionaries who are working with them.
Nice.
So that is, but yes, I hear what she's saying. It cannot be a project for the universities. And I will bring it up in our next synod, that we look at the local churches, identifying the people who are partaking in music, to begin to recognize the original authors of those songs. But also, it is not only that, majority of our churches come from missionary established societies. Therefore, it is a project that has to be deliberate, coming from us now. We don't benefit anything from missionaries. Nothing stops us now to really picture a church that comes from Africa, the indigenization of what was given unto us. Thank you.
Thank you, Moruti Moreosele. Thank you for that important input. Sis Nomfundo, you've been a regular supporter. You've been the constant in all these conversations. We can't close it off without getting an input from you. Thank you.
I'm completely inspired by the presentations and your Black History Month series, which is partly why you see me a lot. And it's a link to home, by the way, don't forget, because I'm so far.
Yes,
and I really do appreciate the fact that you do run such series, because it's a way of us, extending our knowledge to the new generation. From the very onset, with the presentations by Bra Makhene and Nomfundo, I just felt that we should actually say it as it is. The problem we've got is that we're dealing with racism in our institutions. And in fact, not just in South Africa, worldwide. They've constantly, because their way of undermining Black people has always been to do away with our culture, with our indigenous knowledge. So until we can begin to address this very factor, I think we're always going to have these problems. We're talking about small steps as usual, in terms of addressing them, setting up maybe our own theaters in our own communities. We have musicians in our communities. I mean, when I was in Port Elizabeth, when I was home, there were young people who were developing within the Port Elizabeth Theatre, and they were really struggling to have themselves heard, and they would try taking part in festivals which were controlled by white business, the banks, etc. And you know how that goes. Again, it's white influence in terms of who gets funded, who gets put up into the limelight, and depending on what you have to say, they also interpret what's worth hearing up there. Like the Nobel Peace Prize, you don't necessarily get people who fundamentally speak from a Black perspective, hardcore, who are winning such prizes. So our people really
like Ngugi has been denied that prize for a long time, and then it was given to the singer. I don't know what his name is. And 2 years ago, there was a big brouhaha about it.
Divisive the system is, and I think yes, as Nomfundo was saying, we need to establish our own institutions. We can do the little that we do with those who have the skills and the knowledge within their communities until they grow beyond. Because our culture is powerful. I mean, for me, having been Europeanized as such in this Western country, we used to have Black consciousness theatre coming out, and in however fashion they struggled to get out of the country and come and do presentations over here. They were really powerful because through theatre, you can inspire, educate, conscientize people. Through the music that produce, you can also inspire. You know, we know that some musicians have been killed because of their political messages in music. But these are the things that we have to keep to normalize in society.
Okay.
And I think it's really very important that we address that. Racism is the core of all our problems. How do we begin to overcome that? Thank you.
Thank you, Sis Nomfundo. Always on point in your input. We appreciate it. I'm rushing for time. There was a hand up. Who did I miss? But you know yourself. You had your hand up. Please come in. Okay, I think Tekiso, you wanted to have a second bite, but before you come in, let me just read this comment from Nkesi. Nkesi, are you here? You want to make the comment yourself, or you want me to read it? I think we might have lost him, but he absolutely made an interesting comment. He says, "Hi everyone, I trust you are well. I always ask hip hop artists, why do they want to emulate American hip hop culture when the same Americans are fascinated by the African culture? I tell them that they can just cross the street and don't have to board on the plane to experience African culture. In hip hop, we have the 5 elements, which are jing, breakdancing, graffiti, emceeing, and knowledge of self. In terms of these 5 elements, jing represents drumming, breakdancing, okay, quite emceeing could represent Leboko, Siswati paintings, but you get the gist of what he's trying to say. A very important input about if we have hip hop here, does our hip hop have a local African tinge to it? You know, like he says, the guys in America, I'm reminded here, the guys in America actually want to do hip hop the way we do it in Africa. And that was quite a joker, but when he joked, he made some very fundamental points. He says when he was doing poetry in America during the time in exile, there was an African-American artist who came and did, hip hop in the form of poetry. And then he says, I went to congratulate him. I said, man, I like what you did there. It's quite inspiring. But man, what do you mean? Man, what do you mean? This is your shit, man. This is your shit, you know? So effectively, this artist, this African-American hip hop artist was saying, well, you come from Africa. I listen to you, you know, like when we do our, what others call praise singing, which is our poetry, you know, they say that's what inspires them because you don't have to write it. It just flows from your head. So they've tried to do it in English, whereas when you take Imbongi here in South Africa, they do basically the same thing. You know, the rhythm is there, the imagery is there, and all of those things. So yeah, I think we are coming to the end. Segiso, before I step down, you want to make your comment quickly? Or
yeah, I mean, I just wanted to mention, Jorge, one of the ways which I appreciated was particularly women artists from the Eastern Cape, women popular artists who have been going and writing songs that incorporate elements of particularly things like the uhadi, things like the drum, and with the rise of ubungoma, a lot of particularly women being called into ubungoma, they are expressing and writing our own unique and cultural music, which which we can start to practice and start to appreciate and to do. So I just wanted to mention that on that aspect, I'm very excited about that.
Yeah. In fact, all of our cultures here in South Africa, I mean, are quite fascinating. I mean, when I often go to Limpopo with my political activities, we are being entertained by, these groups of artists who perform orchestra, African traditional orchestra, Minowadi Naga, or if they come from Venda, they call it Chikona. And it's so divine when you listen to it, But then I sit and listen to it and say, but, sometimes when modernity comes in, some of those cultures suffer. And then I sit and listen to it and say, but I have heard this thing being performed in Setswana back in the 60s and 70s on Radio Bantu, when people play serangkure and all of those. Those are African traditional instruments that we don't hear today. I don't know if Ntate Makhene and the others who used to listen to Radio Bantu can relate to it, because the stories at that time used to these leading songs into the stories, Zaga 8 o'clock. They used to have that kind of melody coming in. And I had never seen a band play live until I went to Limpopo, where I then met the Chikona players and the Dinaka players. So it's all of these cultures that we must preserve. That's why I say our universities, our churches, and Ntate Makhene was putting emphasis on our royal councils, playing an important part in recording, in preserving that, those cultures, that music, and all of that. We are now at the end of it. I see people are still logging in. It does sound like this is that this might be very interesting from outside, but every party has to come to an end, isn't it? Sis Nomfundo, I hope you're gonna give us a melody. Just
There it goes again.
Most of these people are here for you. And I don't know how we get around it. But before you come in, and then we're gonna sign off with your beautiful song, I just want to take this opportunity to thank every one of you who has participated in this evening's seminar. It has really lived up to the billing of being a finale with the ideas. Well, short of the entertainment, I think we need to overcome that barrier of performing live. I should have read one of my little poems that I do, but when you are sharing, you don't have much time to think forward around those things. But thank you very much. I hope next time when we have a session like this, we will have our poets and artists coming through, but we have done the thinking around the arts. That's what pleases me. And we're gonna record this, and hopefully generations to come will say, well, but our ancestors were also concerned about the state of the arts in South Africa. And we had very brilliant minds in yourselves, Sis Nomfundo and Ntate Makhene, and the participants. And I'm sure Ntate Molefe Pheto, wherever he is, would have really made a very brilliant contribution, because he comes from way back with this. I also, in closing, want to thank all of our other panelists, who humbly accepted our invitations. They never asked us for a dime or a dollar. We just said, it's Black History Month. Let's celebrate our culture. Let's use these seminars to educate and to entertain if we can, but let's enlighten our people. And starting with the young man, what's his name again? It escapes me now. Mujuta Masame, who opened this, the president of AZAPO, who did the speech on behalf of Comrade Strike Tukwane, on behalf of Tiro. The many professors, but also just ordinary people who said, yeah, I'll come onto the panel because I want to talk about Black science. I want to talk about economics. I want to talk about music. I want to talk about ideology, which are the various things that we have handled for this month. So thank you very much. Next year, same time, same place. And Ntate Makhene?
Thanks for the opportunity.
Yes.
This has been an important event. In fact, I'm excited about the the slow growth of Black History Month.
Yes.
And being on the continent, we should look at the prospect of African History Month.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Sis Nomfundo ufuna ukubabulisa? Well, I don't know if that's the correct word.
No, just to say thank you so much for the invite to come in and speak. Yeah, Zoom is a tricky thing to sing, you know, to sing through.
Yeah.
I never really do it, but maybe just to say that I am really the singer on
Yes.
You know, Bayateta, Bateta ngegama la, Bateta ngobomi bam, Bayate. Dimhle, dintombi enesitima, nambela phezulu, Bayateta, owakulethu khala, abantu balo mhlaba, Anthony was such a nerd. I love it.
What a beautiful track. Beautiful track, beautiful everything. We just love it. Have you got it on share, so you want to share it?
I can share it if you allowed screen sharing. I cannot do screen sharing on my side.
No, I've allowed participants to share, all participants, so you can share it. Yeah.
Okay, let me do that. Give me 2 seconds.
Yeah,
I don't know which one to play.
You can, I don't know, you want to see the original or the one where you did the Masitule one? I don't know what you want, Sis Nomfundo. It's your copyright.
Well, I relinquished, you know, Maya Teta to Kutlwano a long time ago, so he does with it what he wants now. So
okay, check this out. The call is yours, apparently.
All right, we'll go with the ones where we did it together.
Okay.
We just here we go.
Sure, that's lovely. Please just hold on, but if you need to sign off, we will understand. You can sign off, but we want to just sign off on that entertaining note. Okay, the sound is not coming through. You are on mute. That's why. You've muted yourself. Wow. Oh. Wow, it was lovely. Wow. Okay, I think you can. Wow. Wow. That's the part we want. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much. What a lovely track and entertainment. Can stop it there, boy. Thank you. All right, are we back on screen? Wow, what a talent. What beautiful music. The piano, absolutely divine. Ladies and gentlemen, comrades and friends, thank you very much for joining us this evening. Have an entertaining and lovely weekend for what's left of it. And let's continue reclaiming, as Sis Nomfundo says, the innovators, where all of this comes from, and start saying this is black music, this is black film, this is black arts, and let's continue producing as well. Thank you, Ntate Motsumi. Thank you very much. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. I'll wait for most of you to sign off.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Thank you. Thank you, Muruti. Thank you, Sis Nondovego and go, Sis Yabonga. Keep fighting there wherever you are in the UK. The struggle is everywhere.